My take on it is I like to put out positive energy, and I like to be able to maintain a compassionate approach to this, because people try these diets because they want results and they feel frustrated with what they've currently got. I remember myself, I did low carb for a while thinking it was best for me, and I got results and I looked good. And so I thought, well, of course, this is the way forward. So I can completely understand where people are coming from with regard to this. And the same with keto. People go on keto diets to get results or to feel better. And I'm not going to be in a position where I deny people's personal experience, but I am going to be in a position where I share information both on long-term health and short-term health outcomes, so that they can then hopefully come to a decision based on rationality over what someone told them once on the internet.
That's Dr. Gemma Newman, and this is the Rich Roll Podcast. The Rich Roll Podcast. Hey everybody, how you guys doing? What's happening? My name is Rich Roll. I am your host. This is my podcast. Welcome or welcome back. Today we have a fun conversation, an informative, immersive conversation, a participatory conversation that we recorded during our recent retreat in Italy. It's with the lovely, the delightful, the whip-smart, UK-based plant-powered doctor herself, Dr. Gemma Newman. And what's interesting about Gemma is that she isn't an ideologue. She didn't arrive upon her conclusions around plant-based eating by way of some kind of moral or ethical compunction, but rather by hard science and self-experimentation. As a young doctor, a recent med school graduate, she, like many newly minted physicians, had been neglecting her own health for some time. She was struggling with her weight and thus went on this journey. She tries a low-carb diet, having bought into the background hum of cut the carbs and all sugar is bad. She'd also read some research around intermittent fasting. She begins calorie counting and carb restriction. She does an hour of exercise every single day, and it worked. I mean, sort of. She found herself going from a size 18 to a size 8, lost a bunch of weight, and feeling, I guess, a little bit smug. She then goes and checks her blood profile and discovers that her lipid panel was significantly raised. And she knew, being a doctor, that having a raised cholesterol and LDL were both markers suggesting a tendency to heart disease. And this is something that runs in her family. Both her father and her grandfather died relatively young of atherosclerosis. But she just sort of chalked it up to being a genetic marker. In the wake of all of this, Gemma is offered a book deal to tell her story, to kind of share her weight loss secrets. But something just didn't feel right to her. She couldn't do it. She didn't feel like she was a nutrition expert. And even though she looked healthy on the outside, this lipid profile issue was really kind of nagging at her in the back of her mind. And she wanted to be able to share an opinion based on research as well as her personal experience. So she turns down the book deal. The story with Gemma continues, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her and all that in a minute. But first, today's episode is brought to you by a brand new sponsor. Super excited about these guys, Grove Collaborative. Look, people, healthy plant-based non-toxic cleaning products work, point blank. And the good ones are actually more enjoyable to use and more accessible and available to you than you might think. They're better for you. They're better for the planet. But where do you start? Who do you trust? Well, that's where Grove Collaborative comes in. Grove Collaborative is the online marketplace that delivers all-natural home, beauty, and personal care products directly to you. Grove takes the guesswork out of going green, and every Grove.co product is guaranteed to be good for you, your family, your home, the planet, so you can save time reading confusing labels. Julie and I just got our first shipment from Grove Collaborative last week, and it was such a convenience not having to shop at multiple stores or search endlessly online to get the natural, good products that we love for our house. And we try to be as mindful as we can when we're picking products for our space. But sometimes you go to one store, they don't have it. You got to go to the other one, they don't have it either. And you kind of give up. But Grove, they make what was once a chore Really simple. So join me and over 500,000 families who trust Grove Collaborative to make their homes happier and healthier. Plus, shipping is fast and free on your first order. For a limited time, when my listeners go to grove.co, not com, grove.co/richroll, you'll get a free 5-piece spring cleaning set from Mrs. Meyer's. And Grove, which has a $30 value, go to grove.co/richroll to get this exclusive offer. grove.co/richroll. Today's episode is also brought to you by Outerknown. Amazing clothes, created sustainably, good for you, good for the planet. Look, finding high-quality clothes that fit isn't always easy. Finding high-quality, sustainably made clothes that fit and look cool, that's a tall order. That can be straight up hard. But not with Outerknown. Founded by pro surfer and 11-time world champion Kelly Slater. You know this guy, right? Outerknown is on a mission to create awesome clothes that don't harm the planet. If you're a regular listener to the show, then you know I've had guests like Joshua Katcher and filmmaker Andrew Morgan, both of whom have come on the show to talk about just how awful the fashion industry is for the earth. Conventional cotton farming is responsible for 25% of the world's total pesticide use. And denim, which we all wear, is one of the filthiest manufacturing processes that exist in apparel. But Outerknown transcends all of this. They transcend the polluted waters of modern garment making. And their manufacturers have come up with this methodology, these procedures to make incredibly comfortable jeans, their SEA jeans, in the world's cleanest solar-powered denim factory, where 98% of the water used in development is actually recycled, and the other 2% is used to build bricks, which is incredible. And they even air dry their products to save energy. And they don't stop there. Outerknown only uses organic cotton, which conserves 90% more water compared to conventional cotton. The clothes are incredible. I mean, everything down to their buttons, which are made from recycled ocean plastics, are consciously crafted with our planet and people in mind. Outerknown, of course, only works with factories that pay fair living wages and provide safe working conditions. And to top it off, the clothes are cool. I'm wearing one of their pairs of SEA jeans right now, and they're super comfortable. They're beautifully made. They're fashionable. I am walking around in proof that you don't have to harm the environment to have badass clothes. But you don't have to take my word for it. You got to try Outerknown for yourself. So go to outerknown.com today and enter my code RICHROLL at checkout, and you'll get 25% off your full price order. That's Outerknown, OUTERKNOWN.com. Check out their sustainable selection of men's and women's apparel, and don't forget to use the promo code RICHROLL for 25% off. So you guys know that we have this Plant Power Meal Planner digital platform, and I wanted to take a minute to kind of share a perspective about it. For those of you who are new to the show, if you're struggling with your diet, which is great that you've turned into this episode because it's all about that. If you're really desiring of mastering your plate, but you feel like I don't have the time, I don't have the budget, I don't really know how to cook all that well, I really think that our Plant Power Meal Planner platform can really help you because we created it to solve one very simple problem. How do you make nutritious eating convenient, delicious, and affordable? When you sign up at meals.richroll.com, you get access to thousands of delicious, easy-to-prepare plant-based recipes that are totally customized based on your personal preferences. We have unlimited grocery lists that are automatically developed when you select the recipes that you like. And it integrates with grocery delivery in most metropolitan areas. So all the things that you need to make the recipes just magically show up at your door. We also have an incredible team of nutrition coaches at the ready 7 days a week to answer all of your questions. And we offer this for just $1.90 a week when you sign up for a year, which is an incredible deal. It's literally a price of a cup of coffee. To learn more, you can go to meals.richroll.com or click on Meal Planner on the top menu on our website. And we recently polled everybody who's using the product, and we got some really incredible results from our survey that I wanted to share with you. First of all, 76% of all users say that the Plant Power Meal Planner has given them better health outcomes than other diets. That's amazing. 98% of users say they prefer the Plant Power Meal Planner over any other diet they've tried. And all of these people who were polled have tried at least one other diet. 86% of users have increased their fruit and veggie consumption by at least 1 serving. 79% have increased their fruit and vegetable intake by 2 or more servings, and 50% have increased their fruit and vegetable intake by 3 or more servings per day. We all know how important that is. And here's a little feedback from some of the users. One person said, it has simplified my plant-based eating and reduced my grocery budget. That's a win. Somebody else said, quote, more energy, better control over hormones, generally happier, less stressed. I was at the point where all I was doing was dieting and my relationship with food was purely negative. Biggest thing for me is that I don't feel hungry. I was always feeling hungry before, and I think it was because I wasn't meeting my body's needs. Way better self-control, less cravings that I can't describe. I'm able to enjoy food again, end quote. What else can you ask for, right? Like I said, super proud of this product. I really recommend anybody who's struggling in this area, check it out. So again, go to meals.richroll.com or click on Meal Planner on the top menu on my website. Okay, so here we have Gemma. She's struggling with this conundrum, slimming down, low-carb style, yet facing unfortunate lipid panels and kind of struggling, grappling with what to do. And around the same time, her husband, Richard, who's a great guy, by the way, picked up a little book called Finding Ultra while training for the London Marathon and decided that he was going to give this whole plant-based diet a try. And now Gemma, on the other hand, being the skeptical doctor that she is, coming out of a very traditional educational background, was, let's just say, not exactly happy about this. She was a little irritated, maybe perhaps a little shocked. Where is he going to get his protein? Won't there be nutritional deficiencies? We'll never be invited to a friend's house for dinner ever again. How will I feed my family? These were her fears, not necessarily in that order. But her husband was undeterred, and this guy, Richard, ends up running his next marathon an incredible 1 hour and 10 minutes faster than his previous time. Now, this got Gemma's attention. She'd already been passionate about researching lifestyle medicine and how changes in things like stress and sleep, exercise, diet could improve health for a long time, but nothing really prepared her for the powerful transformations that were possible when people embraced a whole food plant-based diet. So she starts looking into it more deeply. She starts experimenting on herself, and the results of which we're going to explore today. Again, this is a live recording, and it also includes a really great Q&A with the amazing guests that joined us this year for our retreat in Italy. Really special bunch of people. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Gemma, her second retreat with us, along with her husband, Richard. So let's talk to her. This is me and Dr. Gemma Newman, MD. So last year on this day, we had the Happy Pear guys here, and it was similar. They did a demo, and then they came in here to do a podcast, and we were sitting on this couch, and they were literally like sitting in each other's laps. I was like, could you guys be more conjoined as a singular human?
But it worked.
It always does with them. So over the last couple days, we have explored many themes and topics. We have probed our minds. We've done yoga. We've been trail running, meditation. We traveled to portals unknown beyond Westeros through holotropic breathing and everything in between. And as you might gather, today is more of a food, diet, and nutrition themed sort of experience. We had our food demo with the lads, and I thought this would make for an appropriate moment to have Gemma come on, not just the podcast, but to share with all of you guys here today a little bit about her experience with diet and nutrition from a medical point of view, from a medical perspective. So we're going to talk about all things plant-based. Are you up for it?
I am well and truly ready.
Yeah, good.
I cannot wait.
Well, first of all, what is the kind of landscape or temperature currently in the UK in terms of like the plant-based lifestyle and how people are perceiving it and practicing it?
I think it's really mixed, and there are some areas of medicine that are kind of really switched on. Like, for example, got the Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, and I'm an advisory board member for them, and they're really helping to promote a plant-based lifestyle for health, longevity, and planetary health as well. And then you've got the other sort of contingent where you've got the whole diet wars thing going on, where you've got the low carbers, and you've got the paleos, and you've got the ketos. So my aim in cutting through all that is to just think, what do people actually really need to know? And what they really need to know at this point is that we're eating more than 50% ultra-processed foods. The National Diet and Nutrition Survey in the UK tells us that there's only 8% fruit and vegetable intake in the UK. That's what we are eating. And so when you look at those basic facts, you think, what's the point in arguing amongst ourselves? We need to get people to understand that whole foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, chickpeas, oats, all those kinds of foods, herbs and spices, that is the cornerstone of health. And everybody else can argue over the other bits and pieces, but it's a bit like David Katz at the True Health Initiative. He really tried to get all the nutrition experts, the dietitians, really focused on what do people actually need to know. And that's what I always try and focus on.
And where is the consensus amongst professionals across a variety of disciplines and specialties?
The consensus on the whole is fruit and veg are good. That's what we can all agree on. Unless you're
coming from the carnivore perspective, I suppose.
Yeah. If you're a carnivore, then no, obviously. But that's a whole new level of crazy.
Yeah. Well, that 8% statistic, do you know if that's higher or lower in the United States?
I don't know, but I would imagine it's similar. Probably slightly lower even, because it does seem to be that there's a bigger preponderance of ultra-processed foods here. And many people don't even know what ultra-processed means. When I say the word ultra-processed, then they'll think, well, what does that mean? It's basically...
Well, why don't define it?
Yeah, so when you go into a store, you have a look and see, okay, where are the packaged cakes, where are the packaged breads, all the ready meals that aren't made with whole, fresh ingredients. That's essentially what an ultra-processed food is. You get these little cupcakes and cookies and crisps and chips and those kinds of foods. That's all ultra-processed. And some people, that's all they live on.
Mm-hmm. So. In the United States, a big kind of driving contributor to that is socioeconomic. There's a lot of people who are living in food deserts. They're on food stamps. Their access to fresh produce is limited, and there's a cost barrier in many cases. And this is kind of further driving that divide and making the people who are most in need of health the least healthy. Is it similar in the UK?
Yes, it's similar, but it's not quite so bad in that respect. We have a benefit system, and we have various supermarkets that are within reach for all people. Having said that, there are still financial constraints for a lot of people. And I spoke with a dietitian recently. She was heading up the Blue Dot campaign, which is in the UK, and it's basically helping people to understand about planetary health and making sure that they're making choices for their physical health and the health of future generations. And people who are on the breadline, they don't necessarily want to hear about that, but actually this dietitian I spoke with, who's working with people who've just got out of prison, working with people who are very low socioeconomic status, helping them to understand that actually a diet centered around fruits, vegetables, whole grains and beans can be incredibly, incredibly cheap if you know where to look and if you know how to cook. And that's the other barrier, is actually knowing how to cook in the first place. Yeah. So that's what she's working on, and she's doing some really good work there.
So your practice is, you're a general practitioner. Essentially, correct? But you have all these like subspecialties. I mean, you've had experience in a wide variety of disciplines in your medical career.
Yeah, I have. And I chose to specialize in generalism because I realized that was probably the most effective way of getting people from cradle to grave, gradually, slowly, getting to know them, making those bit-by-bit changes. Because the system in the UK is quite different, although there's still the same pressures. We've only got 10-minute appointment slots. So you have to be fairly disciplined in how you spend that time. They come in, they've got their own expectations of what they're going to get from you. You've got your expectations of what you think they need, and then you've got to marry that with what they think they need and what they actually need, in your opinion, and then you try and bring it all together in 10 minutes and come up with something that will be useful to them. But I like to think of it as a little bit like saving lives in slow motion, because you have the time over several consultations when you know families and you know lots of different people in that family and friend group, to gradually chip away and to give them a few ideas here and there. And it's a really rewarding job. I wouldn't have chosen any other specialty, because it's the only one that I've found where you can really get to know people.
And where did the diet and lifestyle component of your practice begin to, enter into the equation for you?
Well, like most enthusiastic young medics, I wanted to help people. That's why most people go into medicine. And so lifestyle was always pretty important to me. But as a young graduate, I didn't look after myself. So I just ate what I was used to eating, and I didn't really think much about it because I wasn't ill myself. So
you weren't like exercising and eating super healthy while you were, handling some crazy medical school curriculum, working until like 4 a.m. and on these 72-hour shifts where they don't let you sleep?
No, yeah, you're right. No, I wasn't doing that. So I ended up getting obese. I had a high blood pressure. I had high cholesterol, and I felt a bit hypocritical, because I knew that I was going to be in a position where I'd have to help people make some drastic life changes, and I wasn't doing that myself. So my first foray into the world of lifestyle medicine was thinking, okay, well, I need to lose weight, I need to get fit, I need to get healthy. So I just turned to popular culture, as most doctors do, unfortunately, in terms of nutrition at least. And I went on a low-carb diet, and I started calorie counting, and I started exercising for an hour a day, and I got fairly rigorous with it, and I went from a size 18 to a size 8, which I think in the US is 14 to a 4, something like that. Anyway, I worked very hard. I was really kind of smug then. I thought, this is easy. But then, I decided in my smugness to check my blood profiles, and I had a raised cholesterol and lipid profile still. And I kind of had to eat a bit of humble pie, because I thought, okay, maybe this is just my genetic heritage. Maybe this is never going to change for me, because my grandfather had already died of heart disease. And I didn't know it back then, but my father was also going to die suddenly of heart disease in his late 50s, not overweight. So anyway, I kind of forgot about it and just thought, oh, well, just going to have to live and do what I do, until my husband ran the London Marathon. Mm-hmm. And for him, he wanted to do something good. He wanted a good time. But he was getting injuries all the time. He kept on getting inflamed feet and ankles and hips, and had to stop training. And he was quite disappointed with himself. He thought, okay, next year I'm going to do better. And so he started looking for inspiration. And he looked at your book, Finding Ultra.
Sorry about that.
And he also read Brendan Brazier's work, the guy that made Wolverine, like really, really buff. And I think Scott Jurek. Anyway, he said to me, Gemma, I'm going to go plant-based. I was like, what's that? What do you mean? What's that plant-based?
Yeah, and you're the doctor, right? Like, let's just take a step back for a moment. So I gather that there was no nutritional instruction of any substance in your medical school experience. Is that
We
true?
had physiology, and then we had pathophysiology of disease mostly, and communication skills and consultation skills and various specialties and anatomy and pharmacology. So we had a good foundation, but in terms of wellness, in terms of prevention, no, not a great deal at that point. So, yeah, I thought, what does that mean to be plant-based? He said, I'm going to go healthy vegan. I was like, oh my God, we're never going to be invited to someone's house for dinner again, ever. And I was kind of quite negative about the whole thing. And I thought, well,
and how long ago was this?
Probably about 3 years or so ago, maybe. Maybe a bit more. Anyway, so he did what he was going to do, and he ran the next marathon, and he didn't have to stop training, and he was just going from strength to strength, as you can probably imagine. And he ran the marathon an hour and 10 minutes faster than the previous attempt that he had done. Mm-hmm. An hour and 10 minutes.
It was a fluke.
Oh my God. Complete fluke. It made no difference whatsoever. So, he piqued my interest, and I began to read, and then I read more, and then I read more, and then I realized that when I read more, there was even more to read, and I kept on researching. I read, first of all, starting off with books, but then research papers, more research papers, and then I began to feel a little bit silly, to be honest with you. I just thought, my first thought was, why had nobody told me that all this evidence existed?
Yeah, it's interesting that in your own kind of exploration of diet through, popular culture, in order to get yourself sorted out so that you could, be the person you wanted to present to your patients, that you didn't come across this, or that this came as some sort of shock.
It was a huge shock to me. This is strange, isn't it? So I felt stupid a little bit. But then I felt like I had a mission. Thought, this must spread because if someone like myself, who's had years of training, didn't know this, then how is anyone else expected to know this? So it became a passion from that point, but I sneakily decided to start eating plant-based without telling anybody, because I didn't want to lose face, think if I could fail, not do it right. And after 4 weeks... Cheeky bastard,
I know, as they say.
So naughty. And after 4 weeks of my secret plant-based diet, I tested my blood, and over 10 years later, 2 kids later, exercising less than half the amount, I managed completely normal lipid profiles, and I thought, oh, okay, there's something in this. I already knew that there was, because I'd done a lot of research on it, but it took that final personal experience to kind of kick me into action. And then...
Can I interrupt you to ask one question?
Yes.
Just from you being a scientist... You have your husband's anecdotal experience, and you have these, and he's reading these books by these other athletes, but you're coming from this from a different perspective. So I would imagine you're thinking to yourself, like, that's all fine, but like, show me the truth here. So when you did go about looking into the research or trying to find other resources that would kind of meet your litmus test of proof, like what was it that you looked to, or what was it that kind of tipped you over to the...
It was a combination of mechanistic data and epidemiology, really. I wanted to be able to see, does this play out on a population level? And is there a plausible mechanism by which this could be useful? And once I've been able to tally those two together, then it kind of helped me to figure out, okay, there is something in this. Because, any personal experience is going to be useful, but we all have our own cognitive bias. And that's the same for research too. That's something that we have to be mindful of. But at least if you're trying to employ the scientific method, you have a possible plausible mechanism, and then you see, does this play out on a population level? Could this play out? And then when it does, again, it kind of really corroborates that point of view. Yeah. Yeah.
I interrupted you, though. Where were you?
Yeah, where was my flow? I don't know. What was I saying?
Yeah. No, you were talking about
just right,
making these your blood lipids normalized.
Yes,
and
that's
all your
right. So
blood work was
I was jolly, very happy at that point. And then I had the confidence then to sort of mention it to my family, and we had diverticulosis clearing up, arthritis clearing up, recurrent dental abscesses, sorting themselves out. And I thought, okay, this is actually pretty powerful. And then, of course, when I spoke to my patients, that's when the magic really happened. And I began to understand that the power of it, really. What's interesting is I've been talking to them about lifestyle for a long time, and I knew instinctively from my own practice that there was much more to health and wellness than what you put in your mouth. But never had I seen such an easy sort of inroad so that people could actually make those changes gradually in their own health. And it was incredible to me to see the difference in people. Do
you remember, like, the first patient that you... Because I'm thinking, like, okay, like, this is working, but, like, now I'm going to see if, I can prescribe this, but thinking, well, I don't know, should I do this? Should I not do? Like, what was that like?
Distinctly remember the first patient I tried this on. So the patient walked into my room, and he's a South African man, and he was an alpha male type, Maybe not my first experiment, ideally, but it was quite funny because he walked in and he sat down and he looked completely distraught, and he never looks like that normally. And he turned to me and he said, "I've been sent home from work and I've been told not to come back." And I thought, what have I let myself in for here today? Because, in UK medicine, you really have no idea what you're going to be getting. When the patient comes in, it's literally, it could be anything. And people kind of open up to you about like crazy stuff, Anyway, I didn't know what he was going to say. I said, "Why? What's happened? He said, "Well, I failed my work medical. I had a spot test medical, and they did my blood pressure, and it was 180 over 100 millimeters of mercury, which is very high. Normal or optimal would be about 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury. And they took my license away. They informed the DVLA, which is the regulatory body in the UK, and they said, no, you can't come back to work unless you get this sorted out. So here I am." And he just looked at me and was like, "What are we going to do?"
And how old was he?
56, I think he was. And I said, well, normally someone with the blood pressure that high, we're going to need to try at least 3 different agents to kind of get it under control. Not 1, not 2, probably 3. And he said, "There's no way I'm doing that." I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I've never taken tablets. I don't like tablets. I said, well, we've got to do something if you want to go back to work. He says, I'll do anything. And I said, anything? He said, yeah, anything. I said, okay, right. Okay, well, how about we do a really strict whole food plant-based diet and you stop eating your meat, your eggs, your cheese, and you start eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, chickpeas, and oats, and herbs and spices. And he looked at me, his jaw dropped, and he's like, well, maybe I should take that pill. I said, well, it's up to you.
I said everything, but I didn't mean everything.
No, but he was actually really curious because he'd not heard about it either. And he was also desperate because he really loved his job. So he said, okay, doc, I'm going to give this plant thing a try. I was like, okay, fabulous, great. And I gave him some resources and off he went. And I was really wondering what happened to him. So 10 days later, he came back and he had this big grin on his face. He sat down. I said, all right, so what's happened? And he said, I bought a blood pressure machine. I've been checking it at home. I thought you might like to see my readings. So I would love to see your readings. And he got them out. And after the first few days, they were all completely normal. 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury. And I checked it again, it was normal. I brought him back the next week, checked it another time, it was normal. Brought him back the following week, checked it a third time, and did his medical, and then he went back to work. And that was actually the first time that I'd had the confidence to think, could this be an answer? Because I'd done the research around heart disease and, all the benefits for reversing coronary atherosclerosis. I knew about the lifestyle heart trial from the 90s. I knew about Dr. Colwell Esselstyn's work and his incredible results with people with end-stage heart disease. The Mount Abu heart trial from 2011. I'd seen that it could work, but to actually see it in practice, in real life, was just another level, and it was really fulfilling. That was my first foray.
How's that dude doing now?
He's doing fantastically, and he's still at work, and he still loves his job, and he's managed to stick with it. And this is the interesting thing. What I've noticed in my practice is that when people get results, they become the best advocates for that way of eating, and they want to share it with their family and friends, and they can't stop talking about it. And that was the case for him. Yeah. He was really enthusiastic after that.
Well, there's nothing like desperation to fuel willingness.
Exactly. That's why
that creates the foundation for real change.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that level of panic and desperation isn't the norm in the patients that you seek. So what do you do when someone comes to you and they're kind of mildly in trouble, but they don't have that I'll do anything look on their face?
Yeah. That's more of a slow burn. So I'll plant a seed and I'll see if it grows. So what's good about general practice is that you have the opportunity to see them again. And I had this experience with one of my other patients, actually. She was in her 40s, and she was actually quite desperate in the end, but the first time I saw her, she was kind of saying, I'm having issues with my periods and it's not really getting better. So we talked about some of the normal things that we would try and do for that. But then when she came back to me after another couple of consults, she said, I am desperate. So I'd already mentioned the idea of a plant-based diet and how it might be able to help her with her hormonal regulation.
Yeah.
And I'd already told her about the benefits of turmeric and how 2 studies I'd read showed that it could be as effective as an anti-inflammatory painkiller for period pains. I'd already mentioned about how a portion of soy a day could dramatically improve flushes, hormonal flushes. I'd already told her about how estrogen could be estrogen recirculation could be avoided if you have a high fiber diet.
Estrogen.
And I'd already so I'd already given her a lot of information about, and also mood, how I could boost her mood. But she only tried it when she got desperate, and she said, look, 2 weeks out of every 4 is hell for me, so I'm willing to try it. So
you allowed her that space without judgment. There's a very similar thing in recovery community circles around that kind of thing. It's like someone who clearly needs help, and exactly how to help that person, but they don't have that willingness, and you're like, okay, well, maybe you need to go out and do a little more research, but here I am, you can call me when you're ready. And it might be 6 months, it might be a week, it might be a year, but that phone generally rings at some point.
Yeah.
Because they have to discover it for themselves, because willingness is a self-generated thing, right? You can't compel somebody to have that desire to make that change.
Completely. And it has to come from within. And that's the case with everybody that I see. They're all on their own journey, and they're all deciding what part of that journey they're on. And so it could just be a quick conversation. It could be, so what did you have for breakfast this morning? Or it could be, okay, so, have you taken up that hobby you mentioned to me last time? Just little pushes here and there that will help someone towards their intention, towards making a difference that will then make more differences and then create that snowball effect to health. So it's a slow process sometimes.
Right.
Other times it's, like that. If they're ready for a change at the first consult, I have one chap who was completely ready the first time I met him. And that's probably one of the most profound transformations I've seen, actually. Mm-hmm. I could share that sometime.
So you have these experiences, personally, and Richard, your husband, and then you're starting to see this with your patients. So obviously you're becoming more invested in this as a viable solution. Long term, how is this being received by your peers? Like, you're part of a practice group, right? Like, you work with other doctors, or you're part of this, larger community, medical community. Was there like what was the response when you started telling people, like, hey, I'm getting great results doing this?
Well, I'm tremendously fortunate in that I chose a small, friendly practice, and I'm a senior partner there. So when I chose a partner to join me, I chose somebody who was going to be open and friendly and willing to sort of listen to some of the research that I shared with her. And I've had an overwhelmingly positive response on a personal practice level. In the wider community, there's obviously going to be mixed responses, but being a member of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, they are affiliated with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and if you look at the diploma, it's all very much around the idea of a general plant-based nutrition approach. So it's not actually something that's necessarily controversial, it's just not widely known or accepted.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that you never know what you're going to get. Like, when somebody comes in the door, you see, because you're a general practitioner, you're going to see all different kinds of things. But I would imagine there's a general kind of theme in the types of problems. Restricting this to kind of chronic lifestyle type ailments that you're having to contend with.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I would say that the root cause of a lot of the chronic disease I see is some sort of stress response, be that physical or mental or spiritual. And that can then manifest itself most commonly with things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes, hormonal imbalances. And in children, you've got the kind of chronic respiratory infections, allergies, constipation. Yeah. And then in the elderly, we've got rising levels of dementia. But yeah, I'd say probably heart disease number one. But in terms of why that happens, there's a number of things, but the stress response, I think, is something that's very much underrepresented. And when people lack good food, but also lack sometimes purpose or sense of community or sense of belonging, those can really contribute to long-term disease as well. That's what I've noticed in my practice. I've been in the same place for 11 years, and I see it time and again. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, just earlier today, the Happy Pair guys were saying, look, we have our 5 pillars of health, and diet and nutrition are just one of those pillars, right?
Yeah. Sleep
and community, et cetera, all part of like this holistic, equation to be truly well. And, we have an epidemic of not just heart disease and diabetes, but mental health disorders that are being driven by workaholism and anxiety and stress and all of that. So when you have that person come in who's dealing with some, combination of the aforementioned, in addition to like, hey, maybe look at these, dietary protocols, what are some of the other guidelines that you kind of set for someone like that?
So I have a little acronym I like to use, and it's GLOVES. Which is, so we can either take our gloves off. Gloves. Like gloves on your hands.
Okay, gotcha.
So we can either take your gloves off and get your hands dirty, or put your gloves on and get to work. But basically, it's a good word to use to help people remember the different things. So G is, I'll go through what they mean, and then I'll tell you in detail so it makes sense. So gloves. You've got G is gratitude, L is love, O is organic produce, V is veggies, vegetables, E is exercise, and S is sleep. And I will aim to try to approach one of those things as part of one of my consultations, depending on how much time I've got with them. So, I mean, in terms of the gratitude, someone's walking in and they're clearly not going to feel much gratitude because they're like, "There's something wrong with me. You need to fix me." But I try to explain to them, look, if you're having a sense of gratitude in your life, or you're trying to find things to be grateful for, it changes your physiology. And then that also changes your disease risk. And there was an interesting study done at a conference in Washington last year where they measured people's blood levels of cortisol and IgA. So cortisol is the stress response hormone, and IgA is one of the immunoglobulins that we need to create an immune response, a beneficial immune response to protect us against infection. And they measured them before the conference, and then during the conference, they got them to do 5 minutes of gratitude exercises about 3 times a day, just for 2 days. And then they measured their blood afterwards, and they saw a significant drop in the cortisol, and they saw a significant rise in the IgA. So I try to kind of explain to them, in terms of physicality, what an attitude of gratitude could do for them in terms of their current disease state. And L is love, and again, that might sound a little bit cheesy, but it kind of helps me to incorporate self-love, love for others, love for community. Like, what drives you? What is your motivation for change? What gives you meaning, purpose, and intention in your life? And if they can find that, then that's a really good step towards creating a life of well-being. And that can be loads of things. Basically, what they're trying to do there is activate their autonomic nervous system. And there's loads of ways of doing that. You know, you could get into journaling, you could get into meditation, you could get into a hobby, you could get into a community outreach project, you could just spend 5 minutes dancing around your kitchen. But whatever it is to you, find that time, find that thing, that one thing that you changed that week, which would then give you more of a purpose towards moving forwards to well-being. So that's the L. Right. And then you've got the O.
Organic.
Organic. So to me, that's really important. And I understand that there are some financial constrictions for a lot of people in that regard. And so I start out by telling people, why don't you try and get the Clean 15 organic, you know, the environmental working groups, Clean 15 fruits and vegetables. At least that's a start. The Dirty Dozen organic, I mean, so you've got the 12 that absorb the most pesticides. Those would be the organic ones, at least to make a start.
For people that are listening, just go to ewg.org and you can easily find those.
Yeah, and they do a new list each year, don't they? So, but also, it's a good way of making sure that, you know, you're reducing your pesticide and your antibiotic exposure, which is so crucial for gut health, which, you know, many people are now talking about the benefits of gut health and how important that is for pretty much every chronic disease that we're suffering right now. So for me, that's foundational. And the V is veggies, and that includes fruit as well, fruits and vegetables, because, again, that's a huge cornerstone for health. And there's a lot of confusion around fruit and whether we should be eating fruit and the whole kind of low-carb approach to that, which I can come on to later. But it's a nice reminder for people, get as many as you can in. There was a study done that showed that, because in the UK, I don't know what it's like in the US, but the guidelines say about 5 portions a day of fruits and vegetables, which is not nearly enough. And there was a study done recently which showed that 7 or more servings could reduce mortality by around 42%. And then there was a lecturer at Imperial that got together 95 studies, epidemiological studies, and they realized that they didn't seem to be able to find an upper limit of benefit for vegetable and fruit consumption. So nearing 10 portions a day is actually potentially more optimal.
So is that the big speech? Like if somebody comes in and says, look, you know, I'm trying to lose weight or trying to tackle this whatever, you know, medical condition that I have, but you know, I can't eat fruit. Like fruit is like drinking, you know, Coca-Cola or whatever. That's what I've been told. So tell me how to do this without doing that. I mean, is that a common refrain? And how do you?
Well, commonly people say, "Oh, well, I can't eat carbs because I'm trying to lose weight, and potatoes and fruit are not good for you." So that can be a whole new conversation around the causes of insulin resistance and you know why that happens. So essentially, what I try to explain to them is that high blood sugar is the symptom but not the cause of insulin resistance. And insulin resistance basically means that the insulin your body's producing is not being recognized by the cells that need to recognize it. So it's kind of floating around the bloodstream, and you've got these glucose molecules from the food that you're eating floating around the bloodstream, and those glucose molecules need to get inside the cell in order for you to use them for energy. But they're stuck because they need that invitation from the insulin receptor to get inside the cell. So if you're suffering from insulin resistance, it doesn't matter how many new insulin keys your pancreas makes for you, the door's not going to unlock because the lock is jammed. And so when you remove the source of the jammy lock, so if you remove predominantly saturated fat from the diet, from junk food and animal products primarily, then you're going to be reducing that jamming of the lock, and then the sugar can go directly into the cell where it's needed for energy, and your insulin sensitivity shoots through the roof. And there's so much research around this now. Researchers are actually able to infuse free fatty acids into people's bloodstream and watch their insulin resistance rising, and then remove it from the bloodstream and watch their insulin sensitivity rising. That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah. But Dr. Newman, carbs are bad. Fruit is bad.
Yeah.
And I read a book that said I shouldn't eat beans anymore.
Oh, yeah, the beans book. Let's not talk about the beans book. It's interesting because I think there's only one study where they said that someone had a bad reaction to beans. It's because they were drastically undercooked in a hospital environment. Everyone else can have beans. It's okay. But yeah, it's a struggle sometimes. But you know what? That's the beauty of the family physician paradigm, is you can just kind of keep plugging away, and you can show them research, and you can say, okay, how about you read up on this and check out this website and come back to me, let me know what you think.
Well, we're in a very interesting and confusing time. I mean, for generation after generation, when you had something that ailed you, you went to the expert, to the doctor, and the doctor told you what to do. And that was like God. That was not to be questioned, and you were to take that advice. Then something called the internet happened, and suddenly information became readily available. Whether it was good information or bad information seemed to be less important. And now everybody's an expert, and everybody has an opinion. And this is something that has fueled in the positive side, the empowerment of people to be more invested in their well-being, and to be in a mode of discovery all the time, and to sort of, question paradigms, all of which I think are healthy. But at the same time, it's led to these silos and the kind of consolidation of confirmation bias and, kind of tribal signaling and all of this, that has led to some toxicity and confusion. And when you're dealing with medicine, lives hang in the balance. So how do you think about and participate in kind of the discussions, either online or in person, that have to do with this kind of diet divide? We call them the diet wars right now that are rampant.
Yeah. So my take on it is I like to put out positive energy, and I like to be able to maintain a compassionate approach to this, because people try these diets because they want results and they feel frustrated with what they've currently got. And oftentimes when, I remember myself, I did low carb for a while thinking it was best for me, and I got results and I looked good. And so I thought, well, of course, this is the way forward. So I can completely understand where people are coming from with regard to this. And the same with keto. Like, people go on keto diets to get results or to feel better. And I'm not going to be in a position where I deny people's personal experience, but I am going to be in a position where I share information both on long-term health and short-term health outcomes, so that they can then hopefully come to a decision based on rationality over what someone told them once on the internet. So the internet, I think, is fantastic. I do, honestly. When patients come up to me and said, oh, I Googled this, I'm really sorry, I know you won't like it, or I know I shouldn't, I think, actually, no, I'm really glad that you did, because it shows me you have an inquisitive mind, you want to learn, and, we can discuss this, and you can hopefully find some answers that are going to suit your long-term health and well-being. So I don't get involved with the diet wars, but I do like to disseminate positive information. And I think when people are ready and willing to receive that information, then they'll come and they'll read it, and hopefully they will accept it.
What are some of the other experiences that you've had with patients working in this regard?
One major patient that sticks in my mind always, he had a serious problem. So he came into me, and he was the one that I was talking to you about just now, who I'd only seen him that one time. And I know that he'd been in and out to see doctors many times before, but he'd never met me before. And he had prostate cancer. So he'd been seen by the urologist, and they'd said to him, look, it's not an aggressive type. It's a slow-growing type. So we can offer you surgery, or we can kind of watch and wait. We'll see how things go if you want to. And he decided to get his PSA, his prostate-specific antigen, checked every so often to make sure it wasn't going sky high, because he was worried about the risk of surgery and impotence. Okay. But he also had other problems. He was severely depressed. He'd been depressed for many years. He had chronic shoulder pain and tendinitis. He had low back pain and arthritis. He had high cholesterol. He had high blood pressure. He was on 8 different medications, strong opiate painkillers. You name it, he had it. And he was only in his 50s. And he was a slim man. Generally, I felt that having seen him for the first time, he'd already been given everything in the traditional medical model paradigm that he could have been given. And he was in tears that day. He said, look, I just want something to make me feel better. The main problem for him at that point was the pain, his arthritic pain. And I thought to myself, could a plant-based approach be the thing that at least helps lead him to changes in his life? Could it work? And I started to explain to him about some of the studies around prostate cancer and some of the studies around arthritis. And he said, what do you mean? Like, do you think my pain could be improved through diet? And I said, well, yes, I think it's really worth a good go. So he went away. He was like, I'm not sure. I don't think I can do it. What am I going to make? What am I going to cook? So I did spend quite a long time with him that day. Normal 10-minute consults. I spent about 25 minutes, which, again, if I had limitless time, then I would have probably spent a good 2-3 hours with him talking it all through. But he was at that point of desperation that we were talking about earlier. He really wanted to change, and he knew that he'd tried for years on traditional lines and hadn't got anywhere. So I gave him a lot of detailed handwritten information, and I couldn't help but feel for him because he had so many problems. And he came back to me several months later, and I'd wondered in the interim what had happened to him. But, you've got so many patients, you're seeing 30, 40 people a day. You can't be ringing around people saying, yeah, I haven't seen you for a while. What's going on? So I hadn't contacted him, but he came back into me, and I barely recognized him. He had a huge smile on his face. He said, I feel fantastic. I was like, oh, wow, that's great. But what about the shoulder pain? That was really bad. He said, oh, it's gone. I was like, oh, okay.
How much time had elapsed?
7 months. 7 months had passed. And I said, okay, tell me about the back pain. He said, oh, that's gone as well. I said, all right, okay. He said, I've stopped my medications. I said, oh, right, that's great. That's fantastic. I said, what about your blood pressure? No, I've stopped. No, doctor, you don't understand. I've stopped all my medications. I was like, all 8 medications? He said, yes. I said, oh, right, okay. And then I'm panicking, thinking, well, what's his blood results going to be? Has his blood pressure got out of control? But I checked his blood pressure, which was completely normal. And he'd come in for his blood test results that day. And I was able to confirm that his lipid profiles were fine. He didn't need his statins. And the most powerful effect for me actually was being able to look at his PSA result, his prostate-specific antigen, because what I realized when I saw the result was that he'd actually managed to reverse his prostate cancer as well using these lifestyle changes. And when I told him the result, he was in floods of tears, and he immediately called his daughter to tell her the good news. And it's things like that really create a huge, powerful effect in me in terms of my medical practice, because it gives me a sense of meaning and purpose to continue. But also, it's life-changing. This is life or death. And, I don't think family physicians, I don't think that they realize how much difference they can make if they've got the right tools. And we all go into medicine to help. We all go in because we care about people. And often maybe we get a little bit jaded thinking, there's nothing more I can do. I've used up everything in my toolbox. But if you keep filling up your toolbox, then, you find something like plant-based nutrition, which can be hugely powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I think that what happens, and I say this as a total outsider, observationalist, is that you're correct. That people go into medicine well-intentioned. They go in because they want to help people, right? They're well-intentioned, and it's a very laudable thing to do, but there's a system in place that wears people down and creates that cynicism. And you kind of referenced one aspect of it, which is that 10-minute window that you get with a patient. Like, what can you do with that other than try to quickly diagnose and prescribe? And I don't know what the differences are in the UK versus the United States, but in the United States right now, we're seeing the rise of these functional medicine clinics who are trying to create a new paradigm outside of that, 10, 15, 20-minute window, whatever it is, to try to treat patients in a more holistic, 360-degree way. But it sounds like you're trying to do that while still within the structure, that limited structure, right? Which has to be challenging, I would imagine.
That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah. And I understand a functional medicine paradigm has been quite useful for, if nothing else, for really helping somebody be clearly heard and understood, and looking at many different aspects, not just medications and prescribing, but actually how much are they sleeping, how much are they moving, what toxins may they have been in contact with. But for me, at the moment, and for as long as I've been practicing, my passion has been to help people who may not otherwise see the data, may not otherwise look online. So it's kind of a surprise to them when they come into the clinic and they see me, because they're not expecting that sort of lifestyle approach. They're just expecting me to, give them another pill. Right. But for me, that's where the magic happens, is because these people, they wouldn't be able to afford to see a functional medicine practitioner. It costs a lot of money, and they'll be giving out a variety of supplements which they wouldn't be able to afford or maintain. And so for me, I want to make this accessible for everybody. I want every single person at every kind of financial situation to be able to understand simple things that they can do to improve their health and improve their well-being. And that can include food, it can include intention, it can include purpose, meaning, exercise, sleep, all that stuff. And that stuff's, a lot of that stuff is free or very cheap.
Right. Yeah. Well, the information also is not, often it's already, it's not just readily available, it's understood. Like some of these things are common sense, right? So there's this gap between information and understanding and actually practicing it. And it seems that, going back to this discussion around the systemic limitations, a big part of trying to promote adaptability long term is accountability, right? Like having programs in place with your practice, like health coaches or whatever, who are checking in on these people. How are you doing? Do you have questions? Like, is somebody you're going to send them off and say, okay, you need to meditate and you need to do this and you need to do that. And they're like, they've just been going to, whatever the UK's version of Burger King is or whatever, for
it's
as long as they
Burger
live,
King,
like the chances that they're just going to be able to adapt and do it in the manner in which you're prescribing is pretty limited, right? Like, so that goes, like functional medicine clinics can have those kinds of personnel. And, I know,
they've got
Brendan here? Yeah, so Brendan works with Dr. Robert Ostfeld, who does have people that kind of check in, right? And kind of keep you on track and accountable.
That's wonderful. And that's a wonderful resource to have. And it's also, I know Dr. Ostfeld. He's lovely. He's such a nice guy. And I think that's wonderful. It's a lovely future for the healthcare model, and I'd love to see that available for everybody. That would be my ideal, is that everybody could access that. And we don't have the same insurance systems as you do in the US.
Yeah.
It's a nationalized service.
And that's the other big thing, like getting insurance to cover all of this.
Exactly.
That's what changes it all.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what changes the paradigm in the US, is being able to get that in your Medicare.
Yeah.
But in the UK, we have this basic system where things are protocol-driven and financially driven, which in a sense is a good thing because, for example, the pharmaceutical companies can't advertise direct-to-consumer in the UK, and they also have to. There's an element of competition between the different pharmaceutical companies and what drugs that they're able to prescribe, or at least they're able to promote for doctors to prescribe in the UK. They have to be efficient in terms of the finances. So that's a good thing, I think, in terms of keeping the costs down. But we don't have a medical system, I think, that's going to be able to cope with the rate of chronic diseases that we're now experiencing.
Yeah.
No Western medical system that I've seen is going to be able to cope with the current rates of chronic disease that we now have. And that's where I think a massive shift needs to take place, which is why I want to try and make this information ready for everybody to use. Eating organic, eating fruits, eating vegetables, no-till agriculture, restorative agriculture. These are the things that are actually going to change the world and hopefully, change people's lives. But, yeah. trying to make that.
Well, the Happy Pear guys met with Prince Charles.
They did
yesterday, or I think, right, or the day before. Who I guess is super into like regenerative.
I think he must be. He loves his plants.
Oh, we're getting so that we'll see.
Let's hope.
Maybe those guys will save it. Well, now you're like the plant-based doctor. Like,
I am plant-powered doctor.
And I'm wondering whether there are like people who are like, don't go to Dr. Newman. She's going to tell you to go vegan.
It's funny. I know. I do. I don't expect all my patients to go vegan because there's that big emotional barrier for a lot of people. But I do promote plants. Yes, I think, and I say most nutrition experts and dietitians and physicians around the world hopefully would also do the same. So for me, it's just about making sure that they get the education, they understand where their food is coming from, eat as low on the food chain as possible, eliminate sources of antibiotics, pesticides, and toxins, and just eat with joy. Yeah. And, not everybody's going to go vegan, but my hope is that more people will eat a whole food plant-based diet and feel good, and as a result, spread that message. Yeah.
Well, I feel like there's a really vibrant, growing community in at least the London area who's super into this. There's so many events, and so many young people are into it, and so many restaurants. And I attended that thing that you put on last year for, you're doing like panels with all these, medical professionals in this area, and they're well attended, and
they are.
Plant-based news is in London. Like there's a lot happening, in the UK in this movement.
There is, and there is momentum being gained, and there is a lot of excitement, and there has to be. This is an exciting time. We're changing the paradigm a little bit on what people think we have to be, and the time is now. We are in the middle of the 6th Great Extinction. We have to do something now. So young people are hugely receptive to that message because they understand it's their future and the future of their children that's at stake here. So, pun not intended.
Do the ethical and environmental considerations play into how you think about all of this, or do you just try to keep it on the health tip?
With my patients, I try to keep it on the health because I think that's my most important message to them. But when people are taking this way of eating on board for their own reasons, so say, for example, somebody is hugely passionate about animal advocacy and they want to live a healthy life and be a good advocate, so that's where I help them say, okay, well, this is how you do it really healthily. You have a whole food plant-based diet. You don't go along and have all those chips and Oreos, because you're not going to be doing yourself or the animals any favors if you do that. And, likewise, I've got patients who are millennials and they've done their research around climate change and they've been reading up on the Planetary Health Report and all the journals that come out from Oxford University about climate change, and they're really clued up. And so for people like that, their passion is clear, and I just want to make sure that they do this as healthily as possible so that they can keep going with that passion. So, yeah, that's mine.
I want to open this up to everybody so that everybody has a chance to ask their kind of questions around Gemma's expertise and make this more inclusive. But before we do that, I think I want to kick it off with one question that I have, which is, and I get this a lot, like, Rich, I love what you're doing and your lifestyle seems amazing, but I go online and there's so many health, quote unquote professionals or experts who are saying all different manner of things, and it all seems to contradict each other. Like you referenced, low carb keto, fruitarian, raw vegan, carnivore. It's like really hard for even the most well-intentioned, intelligent consumer to make sense of, because everybody seems well-intentioned and they all seem very passionate about what they're saying. And, how many people are going to go on PubMed, and then read past the little summary or whatever to really, it's like, no one's going to do that, right? So we're relying on all of you to try to provide us with guidance and the facts, but it's becoming increasingly more and more difficult to really figure out what's real and what isn't.
I know. I feel for you, Rich.
I feel for you. I just refer people to people like you, and
I'll be honest, I think most doctors don't go on PubMed and read past the abstracts. This is partly why we have a big problem, is that people who have medical credentials don't necessarily read the whole paper, or they may misrepresent the paper. So all I can say is, based on the evidence that I have read from mechanistic data, from cellular longevity, from epidemiology, making plants the basis of your diet is key for microbial health and beyond. So I think it's interesting because when people do well, for example, on the ketogenic diet, I don't want to discount their experience. So I think to myself, well, why is it that they are doing well at this point? And what's interesting to me is that a lot of it does seem to stem from gut health. So if somebody has something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or a leaky gut, then it's going to be very difficult for them to tolerate these healthy, vibrant foods that are so common in a plant-based diet. And so maybe they do feel a little bit better to start with. But of course, if they then try to eat these healthy foods in the future, then they've made their underlying issue worse. And so my aim in speaking with patients is always to come at it with empathy and compassion. Like, what has made you do this way of eating and how do you feel now? And then take it from there. And gut healing, I think, is one of the major things that people need to do when they are starting on this journey if they've got gastrointestinal issues, things like quercetin and glutamate and Restore Gut Health by the fabulous Dr. Zach Bush, as well as gradually reintroducing FODMAP foods, fermentable foods that are tremendously healthy but may cause initial bloating or discomfort. So it really depends on where they're coming from and where they're at. Bottom line is a plant-based diet is the only one that's been proven to reverse heart disease, and it's been proven to be very beneficial for people suffering from a variety of different cancers. And we have great mechanistic data to show why that might be possible. So I have every confidence in recommending a predominantly plant-based diet. And then what they do with that is up to them. But in terms of things like keto, part of the reason that they might be feeling good on it initially is because it's quite an effective way of regenerating mitochondria that are a little bit tired and worn out by the PGC1 alpha pathway. So you think to yourself, well, how else can you regenerate your mitochondria? And there's plenty of ways of doing that don't involve a high meat consumption. In fact, if you are eating a lot of meat on a keto diet, you're probably doing it wrong because you're getting too much protein when you should be having more in the way of fats, actually. So what are the other ways of doing that? Well, you can do high-intensity interval training, for example. You can have an intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding. I mentioned quercetin, which is a plant-based nutrient that you can get from a number of plant foods and also in supplement form. Even jumping in the ocean, having a cold plunge is another way of doing it, having a massage. So there's so many ways of activating the mitochondria that you don't have to do a ketogenic diet to do that. So it's just about kind of helping people understand why they got a benefit and how else could they do so without risking their long-term health.
I like that answer.
Good. I'm glad you like that.
Let's open it up. I want to hear from all of you guys and what you want to hear from Gemma.
Hi, Gemma. Thank you very much for what you do. By the way, we need more doctors like that. My question is around the controversy right now with soy and its connection to estrogen production. And we seem to get a lot of women that are backing away from soy products because of that. What's your take on that?
So I think that soy is sorely misrepresented. Soy has been shown in studies to improve menopausal flushing and in a number of different mechanisms. So it does contain phytoestrogens, but you've got the alpha and the beta estrogen receptors in the body. And the alpha estrogen receptors tend to be on the breast and in the uterus, and the beta ones tend to be on the bone. And the beauty of soy products is that they bind preferentially to the beta estrogen receptors, the ones on the bone, so that they're proven to be quite good for bone health. And whereas when you've got mammalian equivalent estrogens, so for example from cow's milk, they're going to bind preferentially to the alpha estrogen receptors to the breast and the uterus, which would then therefore increase risk potentially of abnormal growths in those areas. So I think if you're worried about phytoestrogens, you probably need to drink less beer because the most potent phytoestrogen is in hops. So if a man's worried about getting man boobs, he should stick away from the beer and he can carry on having as much soy as he wants. Although I would say organic soy is always best. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, thanks, Joe. Super specific question. So I recently I guess just to me, I went plant-based about 15, 16 months ago, and I didn't have a recent blood test before that to compare, but when I had this one, my white blood cell counts were really low. So like it was a 3, and I don't remember what the scale was. I think it's in the thousands, but mine was like 3,000 or something. So I'm just curious if you've seen other plant-based patients who have like a low white blood cell count or anything I could do to kind of counteract that in diet or supplement?
What's interesting is that if you're feeling generally well, you may not need to counteract that, because it may just be that your body is not producing that many white cells because it doesn't have much inflammation or infection to be dealing with at the moment. So I can't go into specifics for your medical history, but what I would say is get it checked again so that you can monitor it over time. And if you're feeling generally well and it's just slightly at the lower end of normal or slightly under the lower end of what most of the people in the population have, it's not actually necessarily a problem, because you're not going to be making so many white cells or neutrophils if you don't have so much inflammation and oxidative stress in your body. Yeah.
Hi, Gemma.
Hello.
I have quite a few friends who are dealing with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, and one in particular who's tried every diet, is on steroids all the time, all of the stuff they normally, tell people with ulcerative colitis to do. And she feels best when she's eating a very high protein diet with very little good carbohydrates and all of that, normal kind of autoimmune protocol diet type thing. My question for you is, she did try an Ayurvedic diet for about a 5-day period and said that she felt worse on it than, on her high protein autoimmune protocol diet. What are your thoughts on someone with ulcerative colitis and what they should do, and if there's a way to do it more plant-based? That's my question.
Thank you.
Really roundabout. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you. I do really feel for your friend, because she's obviously suffering hugely. And ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease are hugely on the rise over the last 50 years, much more so even in the last 10, 20 years. And a lot of that is around our gut health and leaky tight junctions of the gut, and issues around pesticide use and ultra-processed foods. And also, actually, saturated fat sometimes can also contribute to a disruption of those tight junctions. Antibiotics, pesticides, these are all things that have contributed potentially to her issues. So it's going to be a long road probably of healing, and I can't give specific advice for her about which diet she tried and which ones are useful. But what I would say is that giving the gut a rest is always a number one strategy, and you're immediately trying to heal it. Trying to seal up those tight junctions is number 2, and there's multiple ways that I've already mentioned that we can attempt to do that. And for long-term health in people with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, a whole food plant-based diet is tremendously effective. And she might be interested to read the work of Dr. Alan Desmond. He's a good friend of mine. He's a gastroenterologist, and he's talked a lot about the benefits of whole food plant-based diets, and he is a specialist in inflammatory bowel disorders like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. He's on Instagram as Devon Gut Doctor, and you've got Dr. B as well, Will. He's an American gastroenterologist, and he, again, talks in great detail about some of the benefits of plant-based nutrition for these inflammatory bowel diseases. But it's a slow road, and she has to heal the gut first and foremost. So, yeah. So those are some good resources for her to have a look at.
I would also suggest checking out Dr. Robin Shutkan, who I did a podcast with several years ago and has written a couple books on this, but she's amazing as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. I just wonder what your opinion is on B12.
So B12 is an essential vitamin. We use it for, among many things, breaking down homocysteine, which is an inflammatory protein. We also use B6 and folate for that. B12 comes from microbes in the soil, and so if you have a whole food plant-based diet with unwashed vegetables and untreated water in the middle of nowhere, then you're going to probably get plenty of B12. You could also make it if you have optimal microbes within your gut. They will make B12 for you, which is quite wonderful. However, if you have poor gut health, or you're living in a sterile environment, or you're washing your fruits and veggies, or you're drinking treated water, you may find over time that you'll become B12 deplete, in which case a simple supplement is all that you need. And what's interesting is if you're eating a lot of factory farmed animals, they will also be receiving B12 supplementation in their corn, which you then just eat through their muscles because they've been supplemented. So in a sense, you're cutting out the middle cow by doing that. So those are my thoughts on B12. Also, one other point to make, many meat eaters are B12 deficient, especially if you're over the age of 50, if you're taking a proton pump inhibitor, which is a really common kind of antacid medication, if you're on metformin, which is the commonest diabetes medication, if you have an autoimmune disease, again, you're going to be far less likely to be absorbing the B12 from your animal products. So anyone over the age of 50, whatever their diet, may need to just get their B12 checked to make sure that it's optimal.
Yeah, two little follow-up questions on that. One of the things that I have to field or that I hear all the time is, well, a plant-based diet can't be a great diet if it's lacking in this one thing that you have to supplement with it. So it just gets discounted, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because when you look at the nutrient density of different diet types, what you find is that nutritarian approaches, whole food plant-based approaches, and simple plant-based diets are number 1, 2, and 3 in terms of nutrient density. And then you have, things like paleo, maybe a little bit lower down the list, and you've got keto a little bit lower down than that because you're going to get folate deficiency and other sort of mineral deficiencies using that kind of diet. So it's the most nutrient dense way of eating. But yes, B12 is one of the few caveats. But as I say, many animals in the wild don't get B12 deficiency because they're living in accordance with nature. And I think that's what we need to do far more of now and in the future.
They eat dirt, basically.
They eat dirt. Yeah. Let's get back to eating some dirt.
And the second little cleanup follow-up thing on that is there's two kinds of commercially available B12 supplements, right? There's methylcobalamin and cobalamin. Is one better than the other, and why?
Yes, I would say methylcobalamin is much better because it's more bioavailable. You haven't got to do the methylation within your body, and some people have a methylation sort of deficit genetically, which means that they're less able to make that conversion. So, in the UK, there's a methylcobalamin spray that's available, which I love because it's absorbing sublingually, through the tongue, which is my favorite, which is what I like to tell people to use. But you'll have to have a look online and see what's available to you. But methylcobalamin is my preferred version.
And what about B12 shots?
Well,
is that good?
It could be. It depends on your levels, really. If you're feeling well and you've got massively high B12 levels, because you store it for up to 5 years. So if you're getting a B12 shot every month, then you're probably going to be drastically overdosing on B12. So I don't think it's necessary unless you have obvious gut issues or malabsorption issues or methylation issues that you've already had to look into with your physician or nutritionist. Yeah.
Who's next?
I have the mic.
Hello, Jill.
Hi. You and your husband obviously are both eating a plant-based diet. And I was curious how you decided to approach it with your children and having those kinds of conversations, both in regards to health, but also like getting them to eat it.
Yeah, I know. So we are really lucky because so our 2 children at the moment are 7 and 4, and our youngest, he just enjoys what we make at home. He hasn't really put much thought into it. He just loves the food that we give him. So that's quite easy. I imagine that might get more challenging as he gets older. Our youngest, he's an interesting soul because he was more into the compassionate side of things from a young age. So he was the person that encouraged me to stop eating chickens a long time ago. He said to me, we went to the farm and he was picking out eggs and he said to me, Mummy, where do we, what do we eat when we eat a chicken? I said, well, we eat their muscles. I kind of tried to flex my mini bicep and show him like what a muscle looked like. He said, that's what we eat. And he said, oh, well, how do we get it? I thought, oh no, you're only little. Do I have to tell you how we get it? So I had to be honest with him. I said, well, the animal is killed. He said, how? How do we kill it? And I thought, oh no, I don't actually know. I said, or maybe we shoot it or stun it or maybe a knife. I was not obviously prepared for this conversation. And the look on his face, I just thought, okay, you know what, we don't have to eat this. So he had autonomy in that decision, actually, which really helped him, because then he became quite passionate about not eating animals from that point onwards, and perhaps more so than myself. Very much into it.
And this is pre-Richard running marathons?
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
you buried the lead here, because like it's all about your
It was
child.
my son all along.
Yeah.
His 3-year-old inquisitive mind at the time. No, so... but it can be a challenge, especially if they're used to things. But then, in a sense, that's true of any kind of healthful diet change, because kids love sugar, and if they're eating a lot of stuff that's kind of junk food, then that's always going to be a challenge, whatever you're trying to give them. So get them involved in the kitchen, get them involved in making recipes, and make it fun. I'd also say simple things like sitting down together as a family to make it a special occasion, especially as they get a little bit older. They might like to have maybe a little candle with dinner if they're not going to reach forward and grab the flame. So yours, I think youngest is 2, isn't she? Yeah. So let them get messy, let them get involved, and make it fun and not too much pressure. If they don't want to eat it that day, then they don't have to, and then maybe they get a little bit hungry, and that's a shame. But then the next day they're going to really love the dinner, hopefully. But I have made a Vimeo series with Plant-Based News on raising children with a plant-based diet, and I've also done some podcasts on that. So if you go on my website, gemmanewman.com, you'll be able to see quite a lot of resources around children and cookbook recommendations and ideas, and a variety of resources around pregnancy and raising children with a plant-based diet.
And just to flesh that out a little bit further, what is your response when someone comes to you and says, "Listen, I'm really attracted to this plant-based lifestyle, but like I'm terrified of, raising young children on it. I'm afraid they're going to be deficient in something."
Yeah, and that's super common, because people only want the best for their kids, and they hear these scare stories, and I try to reassure them that actually evidence shows that plant-based kids are generally much, much healthier than their omnivorous counterparts. There's less in terms of chronic respiratory infections, allergies, asthma, eczema, and so they'd be reducing their short-term risk of allergies and recurrent infections, and they'd be reducing their long-term risk of heart disease and cancer. So overall, it has to be a good thing. There's not many scientific studies on raising children plant-based, although I did read one in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that was done on British children back in the 70s and 80s, which is really interesting because there weren't that many vegan children back then. And they certainly didn't
eating
have
all kinds of terrible seitan. And,
who knows what they were eating? My goodness, must have been fruits and vegetables and grains. Pretty good stuff overall. So what they discovered was that this group, I think they managed to gather around 60 plant-based kids, and they followed them for 13 years. Some of them pre-pregnancy, some of them up to teenage years. And what they discovered was that they were actually doing tremendously well. This was before they didn't necessarily use any supplementation. They didn't have any of the fortified milks or any of that stuff. And what they found was that they actually, comparing them to their omnivorous counterparts, they had a far superior nutritional profile. They were slightly lower in their calcium scores, but that wasn't significant in terms of their health, and they were lower in terms of their saturated fat exposure. But every other nutrient and mineral they exceeded and were doing exceptionally well. So the researchers actually, it was quite funny reading the study, because the researchers were actually saying, these parents receive a lot of discrimination in the communities, but actually looking at the data, the kids are doing brilliantly.
And is there anything in particular that pregnancy demands or requires in terms of supplementation, or something to be aware of if a pregnant expecting mother is on a plant-based diet?
What's interesting about plant-based diets in pregnancy is that they're already excluding a lot of the things that pregnant women are told to minimize. So, for example, pregnant women are told in the guidelines to minimize their exposure to fish because of the heavy metals, dioxins, PCBs, all of the pollution from ocean fish. So they're going to be excluding those. They're going to be excluding eggs and salmonella risk. They're going to be excluding dairy, cheeses, and listeria risk. So they're actually doing pretty well in terms of benefiting the baby. In terms of things that they might want to look at, I would always suggest a general supplement for every pregnant woman supplement just to be on the safe side. I would recommend iodine because many areas of the UK and in the US are going to be, the soil is going to be iodine deficient, and it's quite hard to get your quota of iodine, which it should hopefully be in the multivitamin, but that's one of the main things. EPA, DHA supplements I like to recommend. There's no study data to suggest it's worth doing, but we can see that it's beneficial for brain health and heart health. And so when you're making a new human, why not get an optimal amount? So yeah, I'd say algae oil supplementation and your multivitamin, which must include things like iron and iodine.
What about iodine?
Or iodine. So it's interesting, actually.
And vitamins.
The vitamins, yes, sorry.
Sorry.
What's interesting is in the UK, there's this condition called Lancashire neck, where people used to get these massive thyroid goiters because they had iodine deficiency from a lack of the mineral in the soil. Nowadays, there's some supplementation, and also in dairy they use iodine to sterilize the milk vats. So that's why a lot of people can get iodine through dairy. If you don't want to get your iodine that way, then you can take a supplement, or you can have organic, nutrient-rich fruits and vegetables, or you can nibble on nori sheets, actually. I mean, my kids love those as a snack. I don't know if you've tried to buy those, because you can make sushi out of those nice nori sheets. They're very iodine-rich. Yeah.
Doesn't milk do a body good? I mean, there's a lot of, listen, to be, very compassionate about this argument, no parent wants to, do the wrong thing by their child. And there's this idea that you need dairy for strong bones, and, who wants to raise a child with brittle, but you'd feel terrible, right? So that, whether it's myth or fact, and I'm interested in how your thoughts on this, it is pervasive and it's very, very strong. And so overcoming that, presumption of truth is very difficult.
Yes, it is. And I think in Western European societies, people relied on dairy for a long time because when you're going through a stage where in human evolution where you've got nutritional scarcity, you're going to want to be able to make sure you can get nutrition from any source possible, which would include the milk of a cow. In your town or village, you had a cow, you'd milk it, you'd get some nutrients, that's fine. I think nowadays we've become acutely aware that milk isn't what it used to be. The cows are kept in very cramped and difficult conditions, which means that they usually receive antibiotics, which will often then be in the milk. They're raised to be pregnant whilst also lactating, which would increase their hormone profile, which is not great in terms of long-term health. You'd be producing IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, when you drink the milk, which has been strongly associated with increased cancer risk. And what's interesting is people are always talking about bone health and how important it is. I haven't read a single study to show increased bone mineral density with increased milk consumption. And I've read maybe 2 or 3 studies to say that actually the opposite is probably true. There was one from Sweden, 100,000 people followed over 20 years. They looked at their milk consumption and they realized that over time there was actually increased fracture risk in women and increased mortality risk for men and women the more milk they consumed. And so trying to understand the mechanism behind that, you can't necessarily get the mechanism through the epidemiological data, but you can have a guess that it could be related to the galactose content, because I didn't see the same association with yogurt because the galactose was partially fermented. But what's interesting about galactose, again, is that researchers often use D-galactose to induce cellular aging in the animals that they test. And so you think, well, if you're giving something that's specific from dairy that will then age the lab animal prematurely, do you really want to be drinking that every day in your coffee? Not really. And also, actually, on the topic of coffee, when you have dairy, when you have cow's milk with the coffee, it can cancel out some of the phytonutrients in it. So it's probably best to be avoided in your coffee as well. But yeah, I mean, there's loads of controversy around it. But I think just trying to get back to basics, look at the data, look at the mechanisms by which potential harm could be caused, and hopefully you'll get to the truth of the matter. I mean, it's interesting because I think you had Volta Longo on as a guest a while back, and he's a longevity researcher, and what he discovered through the mTOR pathway was that there's 3 main mechanisms of cellular aging. you've got excess leucine, excess refined sugar, and excess calories in general. So if you're going to be having a lot of extra calories, then that's not great for cellular aging. If you're going to be having refined sugar from processed foods and junk foods, that's not great. But also excess leucine, which is primarily from animal products, will also age you prematurely. So there's a number of reasons why dairy might not be a good idea. And also the casein proteins, they've been linked to oxidative stress and inflammation as well. There's links to prostate cancer specifically. There's links to other hormone-dependent cancers, breast cancer, ovarian cancer. So, yeah, I'm hoping that, not to be all doom and gloom, but I'm hoping that at least it will be a reassurance for any parent out there that may be deciding not to give their child dairy, that it can actually be a really good decision.
I agree with you. The dairy's not good. But how do I increase my calcium without taking a supplement? Because supplements can be bad for you too.
I think probably the main things for you to focus on would be your green leafy vegetables, your sources of seeds and nuts. Things like tahini actually is a really good calcium source.
I'm sorry, say that one again.
Tahini, it's like a spread that you make from sesame seeds. Dried fruits are really good for that as well. But more than anything else, weight-bearing exercise would be really beneficial.
I work out every day.
Oh. Yeah, some weight-bearing exercise is a really good one. So well done. You're doing a lot of the right stuff, but mainly, as I say, seeds, dried fruits, and leafy greens. The calcium in leafy greens is more bioavailable on the whole. So I think 56% bioavailability compared to 32% or something around those lines between things like broccoli and dairy. So you're going to be able to absorb more of it as long as you keep eating lots of those delicious whole plant foods.
And how about vitamin D?
So vitamin D is crucial for bone health, and we make most of it through sunlight exposure on our skin. It's actually a hormone. Many people are vitamin D deficient. I'm going to say it the right way around.
I want you to keep saying it your way.
Vitamin D.
Yeah. Vitamin D.
So many people have a deficiency in vitamin D, and it's hard because we're not living the same lives that we used to. We're not out in the sunshine very much. So I would recommend a supplement from that point of view, yes, just to make sure that you're optimized. And some people are not very good at making the vitamin D from sunlight exposure. So again, checking your levels, making sure they're optimized, and then taking that as a supplement if necessary would be my best advice for that.
And vitamin D is not a vegan omnivore thing. I mean, the levels of vitamin D deficiency across population in general is quite high.
Exactly.
High, right?
And as I say, 90% is through the skin. So even if you're having loads of things like mushrooms that have been fortified through sunlight and fortified nut milks and things like that, it's only 10% of your requirement, 90% through the skin. So try and get outside in nature. Of course, that's the most important thing. But other than that, then yeah, lots of getting the test done and making sure that you've got a supplement if you need to. Just realised something. I didn't go through the rest of my special gloves acronym about all the things that we need to do.
Well, why don't you
Can I
seize
do
this
that?
moment to do that?
Because I had a little.
Go through that?
We should, because I had a reminder with regard to that. So, O for organic, V for veggies. So for the exercise component, then I would say it's so important to just get outside, but whatever you can manage. We've got Dr. Zach Bush tomorrow, and he's going to talk about all sorts of things, I'm sure. But on my website, I've got a link to his 4-minute nitric oxide workout, which I think is absolutely fantastic, because what it does is it just gives you a 4-minute of intense, but also very achievable exercise that will kind of activate your body and get you moving. But getting outside in nature as part of that exercise is really, really beneficial. You're going to be breathing in all sorts of beneficial microbes. Forest bathing, the Japanese do that. There's a study I read recently which shows that is really beneficial for improving our immune system, boosting, again, IgA levels. So getting outside, breathing in that fresh air, and staying active is crucial. And sleep. I know that might be a little bit of an issue for you, Rich, but we've got to try and get a good night's sleep for overall health. And 7 to 8 hours if possible. Trying to keep a regular sleep pattern is really good. You can't really catch up on lost sleep, unfortunately. A lot of the study data shows that people who stay up too late during the week and think, I'll just lie in the weekend, it doesn't work. It doesn't do the same job metabolically. So trying to stay regular with your sleep patterns, reducing blue light in the evenings so that you can get your serotonin turning into melatonin, which will then improve your sleep patterns, is also crucial. So yeah, that was my little acronym, GLOVES. Yeah.
I just want to thank Rich and Gemma for what you're doing. It's fantastic. Last February, I hadn't listened to Rich's podcast at this stage, but I give PEP public lecture talks on how to rewire your brain, etc. And people had asked me about nutrition, and I honestly believed at that point, before I started this podcast, that if you did everything in moderation, you're going to be okay. And that's what I was doing. And then my lab discovered sugar is as addictive as alcohol and nicotine. So my question is really about sugar and what you tell people. But I basically got diagnosed in February of last year with kind of a mild form of Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, which I didn't expect to ever have because I was exercising, blah, blah, blah. And then for some unknown reason, I got to Rich's podcast and I went plant-based. And then I did blood tests in February, August and December of last year. I did it the same lab, the same time, fasting, to make sure I kept all the variables as tight as I could. And all my numbers went down, not just my TSH and my T3, T4 and my antibodies for the diagnosis, but also my triglycerides, my LDL and my HDL reversed in exactly a better direction, even though I was kind of in range sort of for all those anyway. And I won't go into the rest of how it made me feel. But anyway, so on the sugar side, that was really my question to you, because I wanted to just thank you for that, saving me for getting drugs. My doctor was like, how did you do that? But on the sugar side, so what we've shown is that sugar changes the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and activates the amygdala, the emotional part of the brain, in exactly the same way that alcohol does. And most of the world, the Western world, is consuming 3 times the recommended World Health Organization levels of sugar, and they don't even know they are. And as you know, you've seen probably all of that research around fructose activating the visceral fat cells. That's where the energy is stored, and then it doesn't activate ghrelin and leptin, and that's what make people overconsume other food, because it doesn't make you feel hungry, right? You never feel satisfied when you eat too much sugar. So I'm just interested in your take on what you'll tell your patients. I know you'll be really well read on that.
Yeah. So I tell my patients that sugar is not the enemy as long as they're getting it from a whole source. I think we're wired to respond to sugar, and the sugar from fruits in its whole natural form, which also contains the phytonutrients, the antioxidants, the soluble and insoluble fibers. These are all crucial for being able to absorb the sugar in the way that it's intended. And you're right, the brain responds to sugar in the same way that it responds to other things that you can find addictive, but it's different with whole fruit. And I think if we go back to nature, we go back to basics, people understand that, okay, if I'm going to make fruit the cornerstone of my sugar intake, then that's only going to be a good thing. And it certainly reduces the problems like fatty liver that fructose has been associated with. So I would strongly recommend fruit in its whole natural form as a general advice for anyone that's going on a whole food plant-based diet.
What about smoothies and juicing?
Smoothies and juicing will depend on your pre-existing medical conditions. So, for example, say you're a type 2 diabetic and you've only just discovered the plant-based lifestyle, I don't think it's a good idea to have a fruit-heavy smoothie because you're going to still be quite insulin resistant. If you're generally healthy and fit and well, then I don't see there being too much of an issue, but it's that fast sugar rush, isn't it? So you're taking out extra fiber, especially if you're juicing. I'd say whole foods in its natural form if you're suffering from any kind of condition related to insulin resistance, like polycystic ovarian syndrome or gestational diabetes or type 2 diabetes. Sticking with the vegetable-based smoothies would probably be a better choice for those people.
Yeah, right here. Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, in your patients or studies, if you've seen any difference in testosterone levels, and especially men like over 40, seeing how we're supposed to be decreasing, like a difference between plant-based or non-plant-based diets?
Yeah, testosterone levels seem to be better in vegans, actually, which is rather nice. And we're still waiting for the game changers to come out, but it's not out yet, is it? No, it's still not out yet. But they did a fantastic study on young males who didn't have erectile dysfunction, and they were just young, healthy guys, and they wanted to measure the strength and integrity of their erections overnight. And so what they did was
turgidity.
Turgidity, yes. And what they discovered in these young men who didn't have any kind of erectile dysfunction was that when they gave them a burrito based on beans versus a burrito based on meat, they had significantly firmer and more frequent erections than the men who'd had their meat burritos. So I'd say not only is it likely that your testosterone levels will go up if you have a whole food plant-based diet, but your virility will also rise.
Fairness, isn't that's more of a blood flow thing, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's more of a
testosterone-driven.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. No,
it's not really where I was going with that, but that's.
No, but like
you don't need to worry.
For real, for real. Like as men age up, we start to get concerned. Like our testosterone levels are. I mean, part of that is like they're going to dip. And I personally know a lot of men who are taking testosterone replacement therapy, and it comes up in conversation with guy friends like, hey, are you doing that? Like, how is that working? Should I do that? Should I not do that? What are the dangers? What are the risks? What is the implications of diet on those levels?
So, I mean, in terms of diet, we use cholesterol as a backbone for most of the all of the hormones we make in our body. So cholesterol is the backbone for testosterone and estrogen and cortisol and pretty much every hormone. But we make plenty of that. We're very good cholesterol conservers and we're very good cholesterol makers. So we don't need any extra dietary cholesterol to be able to make those hormone backbones. But when you're on a whole food plant-based diet, it means that you're not overusing the hormones that are already in your system. So having extra dietary fiber means that you're not kind of reabsorbing unnecessary extra hormones, which is quite good for things like estrogen excess or testosterone excess. But in terms of deficiency, I've never seen anybody on a whole food plant-based diet have a testosterone deficiency. And in fact, what's interesting is not to get into the diet wars, of course, but having watched one of the carnivore proponents talk about his own blood profile, he actually had a low testosterone on his carnivore diet. So I think the opposite is true. I think you don't need to worry about your testosterone levels. Yeah.
Have you seen the effects of a plant-based diet on dementia?
Yes, and I'd recommend that you look into the work of Dr. Shirazi on that, because they are real trailblazers with regard to long-term health and dementia rates and plant-based diets. So, yeah, it does seem to help a lot, and there may be multiple mechanisms for that. Again, getting back to gut health and why and where the beta amyloid plaques build up. It's possible that the saturated fats in the diet can disrupt the tight junctions of the gut, which allow the lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, from the gut bacterial cell membranes to go inside the bloodstream, which then increases inflammation, oxidative stress, and then potential beta amyloid plaque formation. The same. So basically, yes, there's quite a few mechanisms where it could be helpful. It's not the only thing that's helpful. So making sure that you're getting a good amount of sleep, for example, is crucial in reducing dementia risk. Generally things like well-being and staying active. So there's a number of things, but a plant-based diet can definitely be helpful, and I'll check out their work if you're interested to know more.
Just to echo Gemma on that, conventional wisdom is essentially that when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia, there's just not that much that can be done, right? But the Scherzays, Dean and Aisha, they're a married couple who have a lab at Loma Linda University. They're having some pretty remarkable success treating a population of patients with diet and lifestyle protocols, and a plant-based diet is part of that. So I would definitely look into their work. I did a podcast with them. You can find it in the archive, and they have a book called The Alzheimer's Solution that I would suggest you check out.
Yeah.
I have a question back on the vitamin D. Do you still get vitamin D if you wear sunblock? The foundation of the question is I always am concerned about using sunblock. But then I also want to get the the vitamin D. So I generally will go out in the sun and not have sunblock, and then everyone's freaking out like, oh, you're going to get skin cancer. And I'm like, well, I feel like sunblock is cancer, like a chemical that may cause cancer down the line, or I can get it from the sun. So I'm choosing that one, I guess.
Yeah, sunblock. So you're not going to be able to get vitamin D if you wear sunblock. And I would suggest sensible sunlight exposure as being the best solution for this. So making sure that you go out in the sun at a time at which your shadow is shorter than your body. Then you'll be able to more efficiently make vitamin D through sunlight exposure. But also become aware of when your skin is starting to feel sensitive to that sun exposure. And then you get into your long cottons and cover up. But that would be my basic advice. I don't think it's healthy to be wearing sunblock all the time. So yeah, that would be my best solution is to just exercise judicious sunlight exposure.
Has there been any formal studies on the plant-based diet and how it affects mental health and mood disorder?
Yes, there have. So interestingly, the SMILES trial came out in 2017, which showed that a modified Mediterranean diet was being used as a therapy for depression. And what they found was this was a diet that was very heavy in vegetables and grains and fruit. They still had a little bit of fish and dairy in that diet, but it was far more plant-based than not. And what they discovered was that in the intervention group with the diet alone, they had a third remission rate in people with mild to moderate depression. And in the group that just had social support, there was, I think it was an 8% remission rate. So there was a very dramatic difference between the two. And there was a study done in the US on 300 people looking at their well-being and anxiety scores. So what they did was, it was a basic workplace intervention. All they did was that they told people, look, you can have a plant-based meal if you like. There's the work canteen. You can choose the plant-based option. And here's a little bit of education around plant-based eating and why it might be good for you. So the people that were educated on plant-based diets decided to, on the whole, probably eat the plant-based option, although they didn't monitor that. But what they did monitor was their cholesterol levels, their weight and their well-being scores, productivity scores, depression scores. And what was fascinating was that with no other intervention, they were able to reduce their weight, reduce their lipid profiles, improve their diabetes if they had it, but also crucially improve their mental health, well-being and productivity at work, which I think is really interesting because a plant-based diet seems to be quite beneficial on a number of levels. You've got the extra fiber. So fiber is not just useful for bulking up your diet and making sure that you don't get diverticular disease or varicose veins or appendicitis. It's actually useful on a microbiome level because what you're doing is you're providing fantastic short-chain fatty acids for your microbes to digest. And then your microbes do all the work for you. They make serotonin for you. They modulate dopamine levels, and that's crucial for mental health. If you're giving an antidepressant, all you're really doing is stopping the serotonin from being, taken up again by the body, and you're stopping yourself from absorbing too much of it. But the beauty of a plant-based diet is that your gut microbes are able to make so much more serotonin. About 70-80% of the serotonin production happens in the gut lining itself. So it's really important for mental health to have a fruit and veg high diet, and obviously I would promote organic fruit and vegetables over non-organic because, again, you've got the beneficial effect of not having those tight junctions of the gut being disturbed, and that can also increase risk of depression. There's a couple of studies on aspartame and artificial sweeteners as well on people who already have mental health problems, and there seemed to be quite a strong association with worsening of those mental health problems with aspartame and other artificial sweeteners, which is something to consider, because if you're having a fizzy drink with an artificial sweetener, you might be aware to stop it, but they're actually contained in a lot of different foods that you might not expect, including things like chewing gum. So that's something else to be aware of as well. But there's loads of mental health resources. And if you want to look on my website, I've actually got a list of many studies to show the improvements in mental health with a plant-based diet, so check that out as well.
And can I just add, Gemma, the research showing about intermittent fasting promoting brain plasticity? So there's extensive research come out in the last year or two that's showing that the intermittent, the 16-8 or whatever it is. I think you had this on your podcast too. But basically, the scientists have shown that you get an increase in brain plasticity. And as you strengthen the front part of your brain, which is where impulse control and executive function sit, that gives you top-down control over the emotional part of the brain, which is where anxiety, fear, and all of these other things sit. So I think intermittent fasting also has a lot of value too in terms of brain plasticity, in terms of dementia and mental health problems, because as you strengthen your brain, you're going to be getting more layers in the onion, so to speak, so you have less to come off as you get older.
That's so interesting, because when I clamp down on impulse control, then I start having all kinds of emotional problems.
That's because you're not getting enough sleep, Rich. Your amygdala's on fire.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Right. Okay.
Last thing, also, the brain needs an incredible large amount of blood flow. And as you're correcting with plant-based and improving people's blood pressure, cholesterol, plaques and tangles and all the other stuff that's happening because everything's going to an end, in the sense that, and you're increasing telomeres as well and telomerase activity, then you're getting more ATP, more mitochondria active inside the brain cells, which require almost all of your energy too, and that's going to help with dementia, depression, all sorts of things too.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Hey, Gemma. Thank you.
Hello.
It's been great. Just wondering what your thoughts on probiotics are. I mean, for a while it was all about probiotics, and now it seems to sort of be leveling out.
So microbial research is, I think, still in its relative infancy. And so we jump on the bandwagon of taking lots of probiotics because we think, well, we've got to get the good stuff in and get rid of the bad stuff. But to my mind, the most important thing is to have a varied, healthy, organic, plant-based diet in terms of being able to feed beneficial gut microbes. Fermented foods are really useful. They're kind of like the cavalry that comes in, but then they also leave again with your stools most commonly. So in order to get those beneficial microbes to stay within the gut where they're needed, to stay within the large intestine, you're going to be having to feed them dietary fiber in the form of fruits, vegetables, whole grains and beans. That is the cornerstone of health. When you've had a course of antibiotics, you're going to have to think a bit more carefully around making sure that you aim to regenerate those lost bugs, because that's a little bit like a nuclear bomb to your beneficial microbes. And so it may be beneficial then to have a short course of probiotics, but it's more important to restore gut health through fruits and vegetables, organic. And I think also Restore Gut Health is a really good supplement for that, which is made by Dr. Zach Bush.
I also think, yes, we're kind of at the emergent, stage of better understanding this field. But there's also a lot of misinformation out there. And I think there's this idea that, hey, I just take my probiotic and so I'm good. And the truth is that the vast majority of the probiotic products that are out there are, for the most part, like garbage, and they're very limited in their strains. And I think because of antibiotic use and the way that antibiotics are used in our food system, matched with the decline in biodiversity of our overall ecosystem and the way our foods are farmed, that it is a real issue. And I think we need to learn a little bit more about how to best deal with this, because I think there are deficiencies that need to be addressed. I'm putting a podcast up soon with it. I did an interview with the founders of this new company called Seed, they're kind of on the cutting edge of this, and there's a lot of great information in that conversation that might be helpful to you.
Yeah. And also, when you're taking a lot of probiotics for a long time, you're actually reducing your diversity of microbes, which is not good for long-term health. So, if you're going to try and do it, then maybe pick one that has the largest diversity for the shortest time. But fruits and vegetables and organic is probably the best way forward. Getting your fibre in.
Excellent job.
You would
say
that.
Listening at home, that's Richard. That's Gemma's husband.
Thank you, my darling. Thank you for the support.
So I just wondered if there's anybody that listens to this podcast that is thinking, okay, this sounds great, but how do I start? What do you say to your patients when they say, great, doctor, what do I do for breakfast, lunch, dinner tomorrow? How do I start?
Yeah, so I give them some...
question.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. So I find their motivation, I find their why, and if they've got a good motivation, then I start simple. I say, okay, so what do you normally eat for breakfast? What do you normally eat for lunch? What do you normally eat for dinner? And then I help them go through some simple swaps. Things that wouldn't necessarily taste identical, but things that they could make just as easily. So, for example, porridge is always a great choice for breakfast. You can mix in some fabulous flax seeds or chia seeds. We know that flax seeds in studies have been shown to dramatically reduce blood pressure in some people. So 1 or 2 tablespoons mixed in is really great.
Sorry to interrupt. Is it important that those flax seeds are ground?
Ground
Can you
flax
digest
seeds.
them if they're not ground?
Yeah, so they're better ground, but then the issue with ground is you've got to make sure that you eat them quickly because then they are less able to stay kind of nutritionally adequate. So buy them ground and use them quick, or buy them whole and grind them yourself and know that the nutrients will stay. Anyway, so not to overcomplicate things. Porridge, seeds, berries. You can have wholemeal bread with your nut butters. You could have a healthy muesli or granola with your nut milks. Give them some basic ideas for breakfast. Then again, depending on what they like to eat for lunch, perhaps a simple plant-based burrito, or maybe they might like a tofu scramble instead of an egg mayo. It really depends on what they normally eat. But then dinner, say, for example, they like a chicken curry, then maybe make a chickpea curry instead. Or if they're a spaghetti bolognese fan, maybe go for a lentil bolognese. A simple one-pot lentil bolognese is so easy, takes 15 minutes, and you can, batch cook. So essentially, find out what they like and give them options that they can make that are just as good but healthy too. And that would be my top tip. If people want more information about recipes and advice, then they can go to my website or my Instagram, Plant Power Doctor, to find out more.
With the little @ symbol in front of it.
With the little @ symbol, at the front. Basically, there's so much more to health than what we put on our plate. But what we do put on our plate, if we can make it healthy and predominantly plant-based, you're really onto a winner. And then that's where you can look at other aspects of health with far more clarity. Yeah.
Let me just.
Go on then.
Can I ask one more question? Because here, I can't believe that we've been going for 2 hours and the word protein has not been uttered yet. Nobody. So I guess that's a testament to how well versed all of you are in this. But of course, the question, "Where do you get your protein?" does come up. And one of the responses that I'm starting to hear, or kind of statements that gets bandied about, is that animal protein is, yes, you can eat a plant-based diet and you can meet your protein needs, but plant protein is inferior to animal protein. So how do you field that question?
So I like to tell people that I used to worry about protein too before I researched it, because I think that's the first question that most people ask. But then I reassure them that plants have protein because that's where the animals get their protein from. So it's a fairly straightforward thing that if the animal that you eat has eaten plants, then they got their protein from those plants. And in fact, people tend to eat twice as much protein as they need and half as much fiber as they need. So the average plant-based eater will actually get twice as much protein in their diet than they actually physically need. So it's generally not a concern, but also you've got to look at your protein package. So what else are you taking in with your protein? And when you're having a meat-heavy diet, then you're going to be getting some protein, obviously. You're going to be getting some omega-6s, predominantly if you've got a factory farmed animal, over omega-3s. But you're also going to be getting various carcinogens at the same time. So when you cook it, what happens when you cook the meat? Then you release heterocyclic amines, which are carcinogenic compounds. And when you grill it, you still get the same heterocyclic amines, and it's worse when you barbecue it, but you can't really escape it. Any kind of animal protein when cooked will do this. If it's a processed meat, then you're going to get N-nitroso compounds, which are also carcinogenic. Then you've got to look at what your body does with it. You've got heme iron, which people say, great, you're going to have more bioavailable iron. Well, that's true. But heme iron also oxidizes more readily in the body, which is associated with inflammation and obviously not good for long-term health. And then what happens when your gut microbes come into contact with that meat? Well, they're going to want to digest the carnitine, and in so doing, you've got gut microbes that produce something called TMA, which then goes to the liver and makes TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, which is a toxin. It increases risk of heart disease, it worsens kidney failure, it worsens heart failure. It's not a good thing to have in the system. So you've got a number of mechanisms by which your animal protein package might be doing more harm than good. And I haven't even mentioned the IGF-1 factor, which I talked about earlier. So you're going to be making more IGF-1, which is associated with increased cancer risk. What do you get in your plant protein package? Well, you get the phytonutrients, the antioxidants, the insoluble and soluble fiber. You get all this good stuff alongside it. So, look at the package as a whole and then decide which one you're going to have more of on your plate.
And if someone's looking to make a change, but they're scared of the, all in, like, okay, I'm just going to change everything overnight. Like most people don't, let's be honest, like that's not how change really is made for people. So if someone's listening to this and they're intrigued and they're, feeling motivated to make a change, but they're trying to figure out, well, what's the first thing that I should do? Like what's the most important? Like if I have to, it's too overwhelming for me, right? Everything that you said, I need time, but like, tell me one thing I can do tomorrow. Like what would be the first most impactful change that person could
The most
make?
impactful thing would be to think, I'm going to change, I'm going to learn one new recipe this week. One new thing that I can learn how to cook that I like, that I can incorporate into my life. And then if you do that every day, every week for 5 weeks, you've pretty much got an entire repertoire, because people kind of stick with the same foods in and out day after day. So if you can make a promise to yourself that you're going to get yourself a plant-based cookbook, or even better, simply just go onto Google and go whole food plant-based recipes and then type in your favorite meal and see what comes up, and promise yourself that you're going to make that meal just that one time, see how it goes, see if you like it. And then perhaps the next week you might try an easy breakfast. Breakfast is kind of easy because you don't have to think too much about that. As long as you've got simple things like oats, you can make plant-powered pancakes, you can make your porridge, you can make your granola, and that's really straightforward. So that could be your first plant-based meal. And then you just have to learn maybe a new recipe every week or two and gradually sort of ease yourself into it. I mean, there's no pressure. It's a diet of abundance. It's a lifestyle of abundance, and that's the thing that we need to remember. I think so many people are caught up on thinking, "Oh, I've got to stop eating this or that." No, you're going to be incorporating an abundance of beautiful, fresh, healthy foods into your life, and hopefully, as you eat those foods, you're going to be able to really get an experience of how delicious it is and how much it's nourishing your body, nourishing your mind, nourishing your soul. And then you're going to want to learn a new meal the next week. You're going to want to learn a new recipe the week after that. Just take it
rather
slow.
than looking at it from a perspective of lack and all the things that you're going to be removing from your plate. Focus on the awesome adventure of building in all these new kinds of foods that you're not used to eating. And then second to that, I think there's a lot of wisdom in mastering one thing at a time. You know, for a lot of people, it's like, I just can't imagine, not putting milk in my coffee, or, something simple like that you can change. Like, okay, well, I'm going to just master almond milk in my coffee instead of that, and like do that for a couple weeks until you feel good about that and you can make the next change.
Exactly. In fact, that's what I would encourage people to do. Anyone that's listening right now, if you've been thinking about a plant-based diet, if you've been wondering about a plant-based diet and you're not sure what the first step to take is, we've obviously covered a lot of ground today, but this could be your chance to make one change, just one thing that you can do tomorrow that could change your daily habit. And if you can keep doing that for a few days and then maybe make one more change, that's the beginning of a new reality for you. So maybe have a think. Is there one thing that you could do today or tomorrow that would make a difference to your daily routine, that you could commit to doing, that you could maybe tell your spouse about, or maybe a friend, so that they can keep you accountable and start you off on your fantastic, abundant health journey?
That's so inspiring. You're very optimistic.
You got to stay optimistic.
Are you truly? When I kind of like take a look from 10,000 feet down on planet Earth, it's easy to despair of how we're treating the planet and to see the declining health of our population. There are tools like we've just been talking about today that can transform all of that, that are accessible and very doable. And yet sometimes I feel like, I don't know, are we going to win this war? How do you look at that?
I like to think of it as as a journey of enlightenment for humanity rather than a war, because otherwise it does get kind of depressing. But if we think of it as a journey of enlightenment, we know instinctively that staying close to nature is super important for our health and for the health of our children. And we know, seeing that one species is dying every 20 minutes, we know we're in the middle of something serious and that something has to be done. But overwhelm is not the emotion with which to face this. Hope and gratitude and love are the emotions with which to face this. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, tell others about your change, feel good, and hopefully the message will spread.
Mic drop. Let's hear it for Gemma Newman. Thank you. Beautiful.
You're welcome.
Yes. What a delight. You can learn more about Gemma at gemmanewman.com and at Plant Powered Doctor. Anything, anywhere else you want to direct people?
Yeah, so the Plant-Based Health Professionals UK are a great organisation headed up by Dr. Shireen Kassam. And that also has a great website, and we do lots of events. We've got a great event coming up with Dr. Kim Williams, former head of the American College of Cardiology. He's going to be talking in London next month. And we've got the Happy Pear guys going to be there as well, and also Bosch. They've done a great plant-based cookbook. So please do come and join us at that event. That's where we'll be. We've got VegMed coming up in October, which is a fantastic international plant-based conference. We've got Dr. Clapper speaking there. I shall be speaking there as well if anybody wants to check that out. There are still tickets available for the public to come along on the public day. So please come and check that out. And those are the two things really. So yeah.
All right. Peace.
Plants.
There we go.
That was great, right? I thought she was awesome. The power of plants. What else can I tell you? I've been banging this drum for so long. Anyway, let Gemma know what you thought of today's conversation. You can hit her up on Twitter at drgemgem, DRGEMGEM, and on Instagram at Plant Powered Doctor. You can learn more by reading her blog at gemmanewman.com. And as always, please check out the show notes at richroll.com on the episode page to take your edification of today's episode beyond the earbuds. Tons of resources and links and stuff like that to learn more about Gemma and plant-based nutrition. Another reminder to go to meals.richroll.com to check out our amazing meal planner that we talked about in the intro. Great reviews. Try it out for yourself. If you would like to support the work we do here on the podcast, a couple simple ways to do that. Tell your friends about it. Tell them about your favorite episode. Talk to them about it at the bar, at the restaurant, over family dinner. Share the show on social media. Take a screen grab, put it up on Instagram, Twitter, wherever, Facebook. Tag me. Sometimes I like to reshare that stuff. Most importantly, hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to this. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave a comment underneath the videos on YouTube. And you can support us on Patreon by going to richroll.com/donate. I want to thank everybody who helped put on the show today. Jason CAMIOLO for audio engineering, production, show notes, interstitial music. Blake Curtis and Margot Lubin for videoing and editing the podcast. Right now, I'm with Blake. He's in the sound booth, so he's taking on some audio engineering tasks today as well. Jessica Miranda for graphics. Allie Rogers for her beautiful photographs. DK for advertiser relationships, and theme music, as always, by Analemma. Appreciate the love, you guys. Thank you for listening. I do not take your attention or your time for granted. And I will see you back here in a couple days with a very hotly anticipated, fantastic conversation with the amazing, the inspirational Rebecca Rush. Yes, the girl power continues with Rebecca. She's amazing. She's an adventure racer, an extraordinary mountain bike champion, endurance athlete, powerhouse. Until then, eat more plants, people, more fruit, more veg. Peace out. Namaste.